going live now. And I'll monitor some stuff.
Okay.
All right. Just making sure we're live. All right. Hi, everyone. This is Carrie Fisher. I am here with Jeannette Washington. Did I say that right? You're Jeannette.
Said it impeccably.
And we're here to talk about her new book. But before we jump into that and the topics and kind of what we're covering, I wanted to let you all know this is live streamed. This is kind of an experiment because it's an interview-ish. So it's going to be kind of casual, a little bit less scripted, that sort of thing. No presentation. It's just going to be conversation. So if you'd like to join in on the conversation, be sure to do it either on YouTube on our top chat, on our chat bot kind of side. It's to like the right of the video that you should be seeing right now. Otherwise, tag us on YouTube under A11yTalks, A11yTalks. All right, that's enough me. Back to Jeannette. Could you tell us first a little bit about yourself and maybe some of your experience on why you feel like you could write this kind of book?
Oh, excellent question, and I'd be happy to share. So as mentioned before, my name is Jeannette Washington, and I am a speech pathologist as well as a software engineer. I began my matriculation wanting to give back and provide civic or dutiful service to those individuals who were having issues with communicating, those who had delays in their speech. And so I began working as a speech pathologist in a public school district in Jackson, Mississippi. I thoroughly enjoyed working with the children there. I had a caseload of about 45 kids, and I saw everything from pre-K to 12th grade. So I had some individuals on my caseload who stuttered, some individuals on my caseload who had articulation disorders. And what that entails is basically someone who may substitute or omit specific speech sounds. So that was a wonderful part of my life and my career. And when I moved to Michigan, to Detroit, Michigan, I decided to learn how to code and how to program and how to create apps and what that would entail for me. And so I went to a coding boot camp. It was a 12-week boot camp at Grand Circus Detroit. And Grand Circus Detroit is actually a really awesome place because now I teach there, and I teach intro to JavaScript and kind of help people transition out of whatever industry that they were previously in and consider an interesting experience in tech or, transitioning into this industry. So after I learned how to code, I became a software engineer at a healthcare company, and I worked there for several years. And I did not love the rigidity of that position. I enjoyed working there and what I did, but it just was very stagnant for me. So I decided to get back in the classroom, and I'm also the chief executive officer, or as I like to call it, the chief academic officer of a company called Barely Articulating. And we are a think tank that exploits or explores different conversations on the diversity continuum. So it's really great work, fun work, exciting work, and it definitely keeps me busy. So that's a little bit about me.
Oh my gosh, I am exhausted just thinking about all the things that you
So
do.
much stuff.
Oh my gosh. So I have to, going back to the idea that you moved to Michigan and then you decided just to randomly like be a coder after being like an audiologist and working with speech pathology. Like what prompted that kind of interest? Is it that you saw that need when you were working with these students before?
So it was a couple things that prompted it. First was I wanted to change. I definitely wanted to change. I was moving from a different climate, a different culture, a different everything. And not only did I want to change or that I was eager to begin something new, but I had always had a spark for technology. I'd always loved learning about assistive technologies for those who are nonverbal. there are individuals with autism who use, and with other ailments or diverse abilities that use technology to help them communicate. And I was very intrigued by that. And so I was offered an opportunity, it was a scholarship to learn coding. And I was like, why not? This might be that change or that difference that I wanted. And you
Yeah.
know what? The story on how I found the scholarship was so random. I was online one night and I was just looking up different opportunities in the Metro Detroit area. And they had this opening for Grand Circus. And I literally had 30 minutes to get this application in before it closed.
Oh
I was like, oh
my
my gosh, let me
goodness.
see. And that's how you kind of know that it was meant,
Yeah.
because I sent off some info and then I got an email like, hey, we want you to interview. It's like, okay, let's
Wow.
see how this goes.
That like gives me cold, like goosebumps, like cold chills everywhere. That's amazing. I didn't know that part of your story. That's really cool.
It was so random, but like I said, everything happens for a reason.
Sometimes I think it's the random things that those opportunities that just kind of fall in your lap sometimes that are the most exciting. And
I agree. I would have to.
good for you for taking a gamble and just kind of going for it. And look at you now. Now you've written a book called Why Dyslexic Narratives Matter in Tech. Like,
Yes,
did you imagine 5 years ago, even like a couple of years ago, that you would be in the position that you are teaching and talking about tech and dyslexia? I can't even say it. I'm like so excited. But you can't. Did you imagine that? Was that a part of your like 5-year plan when you were learning to code and moving to Detroit? Was that part of what you've always thought about in the back of your head, or was this another opportunity
definitely.
that just happened?
Definitely not. I've always been very imaginative as a child. So I knew that writing was a part of my identity, but I didn't know it would be a nonfiction and a technical book. I was thinking maybe at some point I would write a fairy tale or some type of fantasy novel. So when this came into play, it was it was from actually traveling the world. I've visited about 10 countries this past summer. And in traveling, some of the talks I would do would be about special needs, abilities, and how people in the tech industry can um, really hone in to or really appreciate those who have these different abilities. And I saw the market for it. I saw people were like yearning for more understanding of this. And basically that's what Barely Articulating does. In a sense, we spark those conversations. And I was like, well, a book probably needs to follow this, because so many people were, after I would give a talk, people would come up to me, like a line of people like, hey, my son or my brother or I have dyslexia and this resonated with me, and can you tell me this? Or and I was like, wow, okay. I was happy to tell them more information about the research that I've done on an undergraduate and graduate level. But I think I started to see like, wow, this book needs to be created, because so many people have so many questions about how the two of these overlap. How does dyslexia or ADHD or having autism, what does that look like in the workplace? So that was what prompted me. And I really told myself, like, don't waste any time putting this out there, because I didn't want anybody else to write a book about it. So I was like, let me get this out there and be the one to spearhead these conversations,
Mhm.
so we can start developing narratives and helping people voice their concerns or help them voice their appreciation for the abilities that are innate to them. So that was
Mhm.
kind of it.
So it sounds like you're talking about almost like the advantages in tech for being dyslexic, or ways
Absolutely.
that you can, I hate the word overcome, but it's almost like
Mhm.
reframing your disability to actually be something of an asset, right?
Yeah, absolutely. That's definitely what I talk about mainly throughout the book. It's not a humdrum book about, feeling sorry for yourself. It's
Mhm.
more a book of let's roll up our sleeves and let's go to work.
That's awesome. Well, speaking of that, let's go through some of the chapters real quick. And if you want to, I'll say you sent me the chapter title so I can tell you tell the audience about him, and then you can let us know maybe like a quick synopsis of what that chapter is about, more
Okay.
specifically, if that works.
Yeah.
The first one says, "Hello World." Nerdy humor joke, I
Yeah.
assume, right?
It is. It's definitely a play on some nerdy tech humor. And I wanted to use Hello World because that is one of the first things we test as software engineers, or even just working in the capacity where you're learning to code. That's one of the first things you test when you're installing a program on your computer to see if everything is all well and everything is everything. You look at whether you're using JavaScript or Java or Python.
Mhm.
You test Hello World to see if it will display or be output. So that was my play on that. But this introductory chapter basically talks about the fourth industrial age, and it kind of gives you just a teaser as to what the book will encompass. And bear with me, I'm talking to you from my office. My office does not have heat in it, and I am in Michigan. So all of my little sinuses are like, help, help.
No, I'm in the
So
same. I'm north of Chicago in Wisconsin, and what I did is I heated up the room as much as possible with the space
smart
heater
girl,
and then turned
smart.
it off. If you need to take a heat break, that's fine, or
Yeah.
put on another sweater. We can pause.
Okay, so with that in mind, yeah, the first chapter definitely delves into accessibility and the digital age, and it gives you just a sneak peek. It's not a very long chapter. It kind of gives you a gist of what you have to look forward to.
I love that, and the title is perfect. I think every single coder remembers that, no matter what,
No
no
matter
matter
what
what.
language you're learning, you have to
Exactly.
test that hello world.
Hello World. Yep.
Mhm.
Well, we went from Hello World to Dyslexia at First Sight.
So
So, could you tell us what that means to you in this book?
excellent. I would love to. So, Dyslexia at First Sight is the chapter where you start to dig into the meat of the book. You start to really understand exactly what you'll learn, the expectations of the book, and so forth. Dyslexia at First Sight is another, to me, like a play on words type of phrase, because the first chapter mainly talks about technology, and it tells you about accessibility and the digital divide. Now, this chapter is going to dive more into the Orton-Gillingham approach, the multisensory instruction, inclusion, tokenism, and self-advocacy. So this next chapter is going to really lay the foundation and give you the groundwork for what the book is about. I start each chapter with a small story that is, I want to use the word teaser, but the stories are just brief enough where it gives you information or a small narrative about someone with dyslexia. And then you kind of dive in from there. So in this particular chapter, Dyslexia at First Sight, the story begins, and I'm talking about how this person with dyslexia woke up early, and how waking up for them was always a spectator sport. And in waking up, they realized that they had some different things on their to-do list that day. And they looked down at their list of things to do, and they realized that they transposed some numbers for a client that they needed to contact. So it kind of leaves you on the edge. It's more or less a cliffhanger. And then we dive into more information about how language components are all intertwined. And it talks about the academic impact of dyslexia, hence the Orton-Gillingham approach, and ways in which educators use multisensory instruction to tap into their students who possess dyslexia. So this chapter is definitely a little bit more insightful than the first, as the first kind of not only gives you a teaser, it gives you like a fun play on words, and you're really excited to hear the expectations. But the second chapter is more meaty and gritty.
Yeah, and so I'm looking here at these keywords, and some of them I'm familiar with, and you mentioned kind of like employment, inclusion, and self-advocacy and words like that. But could you maybe elaborate? And those kind of make sense to me, but what about the Orton-Gillingham approach? Is that something that you learned in your previous positions and jobs that you used to do as a pathologist, speech pathologist, or is that something specific to dyslexia? I'm kind of curious what that
Yeah.
approach is.
And you know what, that I think that's a fundamental question, because if you're curious, obviously we have some listeners that are probably curious as well. So
Maybe a
thank you
few,
for
yeah.
that. Because again, this is a tech book. And so you're when you start to get exposed to some academic uh titles and phrases, it may throw you a bit. So the Orton-Gillingham approach is a research-based approach that has been statistically relevant as well as helpful for those who possess dyslexia. It is an approach that is, again, scientific. It's based off the science of reading. It was created back in I want to say the 1800s. I definitely had to do my research for this book too. Let's keep that in mind, because I had heard about the Orton-Gillingham approach working as a speech pathologist, working in education. Everyone like swore by it. Like, this is how all of the kids are going to learn how to read. So when I wrote this book, not only did I want to encompass information about this particular approach, but I wanted to go and dive deeper into the etiology. Like, when did this approach become acknowledged and how helpful it is? But to kind of break it down and not waste a whole lot of time talking about it, because you all have to get the book in order to like get all the good stuff. But the
That's true.
the
We don't want to give away too much.
the
Little
the
teasers, little teasers.
little
Yeah.
teasers. The Orton-Gillingham approach is highly recommended by anyone in the field of dyslexia. It is an approach that encompasses or not every, three. It's mainly three multi-sensory techniques. So when you're teaching something, it needs to be something that the students can see, something that they can touch, and something that they can hear. So
Mhm.
again, those are the three multi-sensory things that need to be in play when you're using the Orton-Gillingham approach. And not only did
Mhm.
they find through research that this approach is helpful for those with dyslexia, we've seen that this approach is helpful for all students, not
Mhm.
just dyslexic, not having ADHD or autism, but every typically developing student will benefit from learning through a multisensory approach, which is ultimately a component of the Orton-Gillingham approach.
Well, that to me is just all really fascinating, and for a lot of us, kind of familiar because it's very similar to some of the WCAG rules and regulations that we all
Yeah,
know and love. But
absolutely.
talking about input modalities and different ways to present information, and that we're not just targeting one sense, and that we're
Yeah.
we're thinking about
Mhm,
multiple senses because some
mhm.
people may have limitations or
Yes.
deficits in different ways.
I
So
even think
yeah.
about I even think about when we're posting to social media, when we're posting to
Mhm.
Twitter or Instagram, a lot of times it's really helpful to include those alt
Oh
GIFs or
yeah.
GIFs so that people who are using screen readers can identify with what your meme said or what
Yeah.
your meme looked like. So again, touching base on all three of those senses so that we can create an inclusive community or culture with everything we do, whether that's Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook, the works, even with our websites, obviously.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good point. I remember when Twitter and Instagram and other ones didn't even have the alt description option. So you used to have to do that. Now they have those built in as settings,
Mhm.
but still not with those GIFs or any
They're
little
trying.
videos.
They're
Yeah,
trying.
yeah. They're trying. They're trying. Maybe. I don't know. But yeah, I think it's a good point. Definitely want to make
Amazing.
sure we add that to our social media. All right,
Yeah.
so that's kind of the first couple of chapters, and then we kind of get into some um, more theory and more specific things to dyslexia and other disorders that could be, would you say like related or
Yeah.
actually, or just could benefit from the same
Hmm.
processes? So this book is not necessarily just about dyslexia. So
Hmm.
in decoding
Agree.
biases, what else do you talk about?
Okay. So we've talked about the chapters Hello World, Dyslexia at
Mhm.
First Sight. Then we get to the third chapter, which is Decoding Biases, as you said. And Decoding Biases is a chapter where it addresses ADHD, it addresses dyspraxia, it also addresses dyscalculia,
Mhm.
auditory processing disorders, visual processing disorders. And as you mentioned, these are obviously outside of the realm of dyslexia, but a lot of times you will see the two coexist. From the research that I've read from various credible sources, it says that about 40% of those with dyslexia also have ADHD, which is attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. So this book would have been a miss, if I did not go ahead and touch bases on that and other overlapping abilities. And I don't often use the word deficits because I like to think on a spectrum that we all different, and not only by our color or by
Mhm.
our the way we think, but so you'll hear me kind of combat with myself, like go back and forth with using the word disability or difference, because I definitely don't like to shine a light on it as if it is something that's a bad thing, and then you don't want to, well, in my opinion, I don't want to overly just make it seem like it's just this wonderful gift, because obviously people who are experiencing these differences, they may not wake up every day and say, "Ah, this is a great gift that I have to share with the world," So you want to
Mhm.
be conscientious of how you're using terminology as it relates to these differences. But yeah, so the third chapter again, which is called Decoding Biases, it definitely taps into some definitions and some workable information and insight as it relates to some different comorbidities and some related instances that people may also have dyslexia, and then they may experience some mental health disorders.
Mhm.
So that's the thing, because you can imagine, as I just expressed about people not waking up thinking that this is a gift they can share with the world. You have some people who experience depression,
Mhm.
they experience anxiety, they experience some different mental health differences because of the overlining or the umbrella of dyslexia. It comes with its own differences that'll
Mhm.
attach itself to it. So
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. Definitely, I think terminology and how we phrase things is definitely important, and it's hard to talk about things that some people may think as a hindrance or something
yeah.
that it stops them from doing it, whereas other people don't think like that, or they on some days they do, or some days they don't. I've seen a couple really cool talks when they talk about this idea of like we only have this many spoons, like you have 10 spoons,
Mhm.
and that equals to like your energy and like you're ready to go for the day, and like 10, if you're all full, all 10 spoons are full, like you can take on everything. But when you have maybe a disability or you have a bad day, right, or you're stressed, maybe those spoons go down. And so it's not necessarily that we all start off with 10 spoons in a day. Some of us might start the day off with 7 spoons if we didn't sleep
Yeah.
well.
Some
Or
might start with 4, you just never know.
depending on the day,
When
that is
I when I
legit.
came home last night, I had about 2 spoons left. I said, "You know what? I am exhausted."
And some days are like that, and the idea that maybe people who have things, innately physical things that they have to overcome, or mental things that they have to overcome, emotional things that they have to
Yeah.
overcome, that maybe they start off on smaller amount of spoons even
Yes.
before the day starts. And so by like 4 o'clock in the afternoon, they're ready for the
They're
day
over
to be
it.
done.
Mhm.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's since you said that, I wanna also mention I've been doing research about trauma and trauma-informed resiliency. And, I imagine that some people with dyslexia or with autism, maybe they're hearing things at home or from their colleagues that aren't really too to
Mm.
uplifting, and it starts to attack their nervous system. So now their self-talk isn't as positive as it would normally be. So now they're telling themselves, I'm stupid and I just don't get it. Oh my gosh, so it's just so many things that people deal with upon leaving the house in the morning, and we have to be conscious of
Mhm.
that before we start unloading on people with our issues, or unloading on them with our baseline and specifics that we have to get accomplished. So it's a lot of work, and I'm I'm happy that I'm able to be a lifelong learner. Being
Mhm.
a speech pathologist and also working as a software engineer has given me the capacity or the bandwidth to understand that I will always be learning. I will always be learning. So
Mhm.
now that I'm learning about trauma, I see how it affects the nervous system. And somebody's nervous system may give them the ability to do some different things than ours, so we can't really judge. Someone may want to punch a wall, and we're like, "Ooh, that was a lot," but you really
Mhm.
don't understand at a level of what they're experiencing. So we want to be careful with that.
Yeah, I think that's amazing and a very good way to segue into your the next chapter, which is don't diss my ability.
Mhm.
When it's talking about things like it sounds like imposter syndrome and the legal ramifications, and what happens when you're in the workplace and you're dealing with things like dyslexia, and your coworkers wondering why it's taking you so long to get something done. Maybe you had two spoons that day, like so
Pull the
tell us a
two
little bit.
spooner.
Yeah, it's a two-spoon kind of day. That's bad. That's when you go back to bed and you say, "Okay, talk to me tomorrow for sure."
So I start that particular chapter, Don't Diss My Ability, with a quote that I created. It says, I decide the stories that I will believe about my abilities and inabilities.
Mm,
So, with that in mind, that is more about self advocacy. And it's about knowing, as you mentioned, the legal ramifications. I read through research that 70% of those with dyslexia conceal their diagnosis from their employers because they don't want to be given either special
mm,
treatment, or they don't want to feel like they're incapable of doing their job, or they may just feel as though they don't want to lose their job. So,
mhm,
with that in mind, it's important to know exactly when you're going into the workforce, what's expected of you, and how we can start having these dialogues with our employer about what we need to get the job done. I think a lot of us, those with disabilities, those with differences, those with special abilities, or however you want to frame it, when we go into the workforce, a lot of times we're putting our heads down and we're getting the work done. We're just
mhm,
tapping away on the computer. But this particular chapter is about standing up for yourself and going to seek more knowledge about what can be done as far as accommodations. I talk about a lot of different research that I've seen about different tools, different tech tools that are useful for those individuals who experience issues with reading or with comprehending written written words, or comprehending speech. Because again, when you have dyslexia, you are going to have you may possibly, because I think about it like this: dyslexia is like a Rubik's cube. It's
mhm.
going to always be a different way to look at it, per se. And it's not just like a coin where you can flip one side, this side, or that side. It's really a spectrum. So with that in mind, it's important to know the different tools that you can use, those tools you can put in your little tool belt that will make
Mhm.
you more efficient, that will help you with your time management, that will help you to communicate with your colleagues as well as your superiors better. So that's all what that particular chapter is about, and it's
Yeah.
definitely a goodie, because it took the most time for me to write that, because I wanted to make sure that I looked at every single tool that I thought would be useful for someone working in the software engineering space. I
Mhm.
got a lot of help from Yale University and from the University of Michigan. to understand the tools that they were recommending. So I had to try out some of the apps that they said were advantageous for those with dyslexia. So that chapter is it's a goodie.
Yeah, I mean, that one sounds heavy. It sounds like you've got a lot, covered a lot in that. I think that'd be a really great asset to a lot of people who are in tech and have this.
Yeah.
And I think it really hits home. One of the things that you mentioned was, about people in tech or not wanting to tell their employer or their coworkers. I had that exact experience with a former coworker where I worked with him for, I don't know, like 2.5 years. We
Mhm.
worked on accessibility things together. He was on the team,
Awesome.
like,
Mhm.
and I didn't know until like towards the end of those 3 years that he actually had dyslexia. He
Wow.
never told
Wow.
us, even though
Mhm.
he was in theory in a safe space, but that was his story to tell, and he told it in his own time. But it was just interesting to me because I would have never in a billion years would have guessed, because he hid it so well. And
Mhm.
that's not a question I felt like I could ask. Why would you want to hide
Yeah.
this? But
Mhm.
I can see why,
But
and part
you'll
of
you'll
it.
find that that's very relevant in well, for those with dyslexia, and that's
Mhm.
why we know that these individuals are so masterful. Because how are you able to conceal this,
Yeah.
all your life? They have workarounds and certain things that they do, hacks, if you will,
Mhm.
that they use to help them to cope through the challenges they experience. So dyslexics are usually above or average in their intelligence level.
Mhm.
And so it's not something that you know immediately. It's not something that you have to be you have to be taking special classes in traditional school to have dyslexia. A lot of people will like suffer in silence. And
Mhm.
I know specifically for young ladies, this is true because young boys, they're very expressive. If they're having trouble with reading, they'll act out. And
Mhm.
so usually what you will see as they become adults, when you talk to people with dyslexia, and boys specifically, or grown men actually specifically, they'll tell you things like they got in trouble a lot in school. And you'll say, oh, okay, because they were deflecting. Their teacher
Mhm.
may have said something like, read this. And so they just threw a chair or flipped on the floor or picked a fight or became a
Mhm.
class clown.
So
And
they didn't
girls,
have to read it. Yeah,
yep, they
yeah,
didn't
yeah.
have to read it. So again, that's one of the little hacks that they use. Like, I'd rather go to the principal's office and go home for the day than to read. And I know that I'm having issues with reading. And
Mhm.
with girls, again, we're going to be more, we're so quiet and demure sometimes when we're in school that the teacher may not even pick us to read because they're like, she got it. She understands what's going on.
Mhm.
And she's just sitting there, just looking at the words. And they may not be of a level of comprehension to her, but she's quiet. Otherwise, like I said, the boys who become grown men, a lot of their stories, when you talk to them about their matriculation through school, they'll say that they had struggles,
Mhm.
and they were, maybe not the kid in class all the time because they were facing suspension or something.
So those were all kind of generalizations, like based on your experiences in the past and your interviews. But I mean,
Absolutely.
the vice versa could happen, right? I mean, like
Mhm.
a
Yeah,
boy could be quieter and
absolutely.
a little girl could
Absolutely.
be loud, but
I see it
um,
more in the boys, but as you said, this is just a generalization from the hundreds of students I've worked with. I'm able to usually spot out some issues with the young men opposed to the young women. But again,
mhm,
this is a complete generalization, and this is just from my experience. I'm sure someone can say that they experience the opposite or
mhm.
something similar. So yeah, you're correct.
Well, and if I correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that dyslexia is more prominent in young boys, than there is girls. Is that a true
No,
fact?
no,
Or did I just
it's
yeah,
actually 50-50.
it's
It's
about
actually
50-50.
50-50.
Okay.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
maybe it is more that they're diagnosed more, because that was something I had in my head, like,
Mhm.
it was more of a male,
And I think,
hereditary thing, yeah.
yeah, so it's not a male hereditary thing, but as I stated, when the boys are being so expressive, you tend to say, well, let's take him to, see someone so we can get to the bottom of why he's acting
Makes
out.
sense.
When you have a student, and I won't say a girl, but when you have a student that's sitting there and they're quiet and they're trying and they're not really being expressive, you tend to let those students kind of slip through the cracks. And so it's those who are shouting and doing their own thing that you're like, we need to see about getting this one some support or some additional assistance. And then usually in a school, usually that looks like getting them assessed.
Makes sense. Yeah. So do we cover all the chapters, or because we kind of talked a little bit about the last one, the tech to me, unless that's different.
No, so we did not cover all the chapters. And for those who are listening and watching, it is 5 chapters. So after Don't Diss My Ability comes Tech to Me. Now, Tech to Me is more about the language processing software and image recognition software that exists that is helpful to those with dyslexia. This final chapter, I answered the question that is on the cover of our books, why dyslexic narratives matter in tech. So it talks more about artificial intelligence, VR, and it also taps into tips to jumpstart your career in tech today. So for those individuals who have dyslexia, they see this book and they say, I always have had an interest in tech, but I don't know where to start. This would be a great starting point at chapter 5, because at the end of the book, it tells you ways in which you can jumpstart or initiate a career in tech if you haven't already.
Yeah, sorry. For some reason, I thought that was related to the one where you're talking about the tools. So this is beyond just the tools. This is talking about maybe strategies or like pro tips on how to get involved.
Yeah, some life hacks and pro tips that get you that will get you in the door and possibly get you an interview. So hey.
So yeah, like hey, yeah. I mean, getting your foot in the door, that's the key, definitely.
Yeah.
This is awesome. I cannot wait to read the rest of the the content in your book, because you gave me the outline and now I have to buy it. So where do I buy this book? Can I
So
get
I have some exciting news. I
Yeah.
just recorded the Audible for this. So for those who have issues with reading, or they find it more accessible to listen to the story, that will be available next week. The Audible will be available next week. However, you can purchase my book on Amazon. You can purchase it at Barnes and Nobles. Those are the ebooks. The actual copy, you'll have to visit my website, and I have some paperbacks that I'm shipping out to a lot of people. I've shipped some overseas to Nigeria. I've sent some to the UK. I'm excited to get some into the public library so that individuals can really see the benefit that they can make in the tech industry. And I don't want anybody with dyslexia, ADHD, or any other difference to count themselves out and to consider themselves as a lost cause. So I'm wanting to get this on all the shelves possible so I can inspire people to live their very best tech life.
That's awesome. And we'll be sure to make sure to post those links in the chat, either in the chat or underneath the video after this live stream is done. So again, Barnes and Noble, it sounds like Amazon, you have an Audible, and then on your own personal website if you want a hard copy.
Absolutely.
That's awesome. So can I ask you a few questions about just like writing books in general? Because we got to talk a lot about the specifics of the book, but as somebody who's written articles in the past, I'm a little like impressed. It definitely is the word, but also like overwhelmed by the idea that you did this and how you did this. You know, how was it difficult to write a book at this level?
So I mentioned earlier that after traveling overseas, I saw the need for this book to exist. So honestly, it wasn't very difficult because I was very inspired to do this. I was very inspired to provide insight to those individuals with dyslexia. So I think that it fueled me to write the book. So I will say that, and I'm going to cut my light on in just a second. I'm sorry to those who, who saw the darkness go for a second. But there we go, light up
It's
again.
dark in the winter in Michigan and Wisconsin. People like
We're in the dark ages over here, people.
we
Sorry.
had a friend in the live chat from Greece and talking about how sunny and warm it was. So I was like, yeah, no.
It's not. We can't say that we are experiencing the same
Nope.
thing.
We're gonna
We
come and
don't
go
have that in common.
we're
We
gonna
don't.
visit her though. Like I think we're booking our
Good.
flights right now, right? You and
Yes.
I.
Yeah.
Let's go to Greece.
Okay. Look, I'm ready. Look, I'll buy my clothes when I get there. Let's just go.
Exactly. I think you
But
just need a swimsuit and a cover up. I think you'll be
and that's
fine.
it. That's all.
That's
And when
awesome.
we get off the flights, we'll get our coconuts and all of our libations from that point. So yeah, I will say that writing the book, I was just inspired on a heavy level to get this out there. And I was just thinking like somebody needs to hear this. Somebody needs to know that they can still rise with the tech tide. So that's what really inspired me. And I set little deadlines for myself, but I kept missing the deadlines. So, so I won't
As you
say
do.
that was I won't say that was any help, but it was just seeing how many people I felt needed to hear this. So
So
that's what did it for me.
you just had that drive, like just innate drive, like I know this needs to be out there. Let's just do it. I'll figure out
And then
those details
I
later.
figured if I don't do it, somebody's gonna do it, and I'm gonna be like, I wanted to do it. So that, maybe that was a little bit of the reason too, because I was thinking, I've been reading a lot of articles, and I know you said that you write articles. I've been reading a lot of articles about people starting coding boot camps for people with autism or with ADHD, and so I was like, this needs to exist. So that was again my motivating factor. Now, mind you, I definitely have a lot going on outside of that. So, but it was intentional, and I had to make myself spend time critiquing my book because I had a lot that was written, but I had to kind of go back in, make it suitable for the 5 chapters because, I was going off board and talking about this and that, and I said, nope. I
So
gave myself.
yeah, no. So did you edit your own book? I mean, that sounds really difficult. Or did you have like
So I
editors as well?
definitely, yeah, I hired 2 editors, maybe 3. I think I had about 3 people look over it, because I did not want to tell a story that I didn't feel was authentic. So I had some of my friends who experienced dyslexia or who have been diagnosed with dyslexia also kind of listen in or chime in or give their 2 cents to tell me what they felt needed to be in the book. I did an editing process myself, and I will say this: it was really helpful to use an app that read the document to me because I could pick up errors quickly. When you're reading something, sometimes you see so many words, you're like, oh my God, it's almost a fatigue. But when I listened to it, I was able to pick up on things like this is not standard English. What is
That's
so
yeah.
that
I mean,
was
that's
helpful
awesome.
for me. Yeah,
I
that was
do
helpful.
that sometimes with my articles too. I fire up a screen
Good.
reader and I have it read it to me because I'm also because I'm lazy or like what you said, like you almost, if you've seen it 10 times and
Mm, mm,
you don't really read all the words anymore because you know what
yeah,
you were meaning.
exactly. So yeah,
So,
screen readers are super helpful, and those are an accessible tool that was probably
mhm,
created for people with with different abilities, but we can still benefit from it. So that says a
exactly.
lot.
Yeah. We cheat. We cheat a little bit and use it, but yeah. No,
Just a little.
I think that's great. So you wrote the whole book, you had some editors, and then how did you decide how to publish it or how did that process work? I'm just kind of curious how if that
That
was
was
difficult.
that was an interesting process. It was a lot of moving parts, and it was one of those things where you kind of learned as you go. So I read articles about how to do it, and I asked a couple people about how to do it, and then I kind of just did it. So it was definitely it was a learning experience. I'll say that because I didn't really know. It wasn't a guide for me. I didn't have steps. I just kind of read and I said, okay,
Mhm.
this is what I can do. Then I was like, then another thing now that I think about it is Amazon, and a lot of other companies, they'll let you publish, but then they say, hey, we want our cut too. So then you gotta kind of read the fine line and the fine print um, in those regards, because some companies will definitely publish it for you and take the ease of, publishing it,
Mhm.
but at what cost?
Exactly.
So
Yeah.
yeah, that was something I had to do research on. So yeah, it was a learn as you go kind of thing.
I look up to you like immensely because I feel like, well, I mean, honest, like I feel not just for writing a book, which is a huge
Mhm.
accomplishment. So
Thank you.
congratulations on just
Yeah.
doing that. But like having the kind of like the guts to like,
I
move
know.
and change careers, and like I changed careers and now I want to write a book
Yeah.
about it, and like really like going all in, and like even if you're not, a pro at,
Mhm,
one aspect of that, you like you said, the lifelong learner.
mhm.
You don't give up, and you just kind of persevere and figure it out, like.
And I will say this, I'll be vulnerable, and just say this, moving here was not easy. Um,
Mhm.
I was born and raised in Michigan. I left Michigan at 17 to attend college at Jackson State University, which is a historically Black college. And I wanted to go there because we didn't have any historically Black colleges here. And I
Mhm.
felt like I was missing something. So, anywho, I did a pilgrimage all the way to Mississippi and I went to school there. Then I went to school in New Hampshire, and after getting my graduate degree, um, my life kind of shifted in a sense of my family life. So
Mhm.
my husband and I decided that we didn't want to be married to each other anymore. So that was kind of a piece of me moving to Michigan because I wanted to go back to my roots. I
Mhm.
wanted to be closer to family. And although this is personal, I will just say that, when things happen like that, you kind of have to persevere and kind of move forward. Like, okay,
Mhm.
what am I going to do? So that's what really prompted me to move back to Michigan, because I wanted a fresh start. I
Mhm.
wanted a change. I mentioned that earlier. And Michigan gave me that change because when I got here, I started from the bottom. So I had no other options, whether going
Mhm.
left or right. It was like I gotta move my way, work my way up. So tech came in at a perfect time. It gave me that comfort of knowing that I was doing something different and I was doing something impactful that could potentially change the world. So again, those things helped me kind of keep moving forward because it was difficult to get out of the way I was learning. I went to school, my degree and my background is kind of in the liberal arts type of, or the science,
Mhm.
field. But to learn the code, I feel like I had to tap into the mathematics side, which wasn't my favorite side.
Mhm.
So, it was definitely pulling me in different directions. But I will say, you have to be uncomfortable, and
Mhm.
that's how you grow. So,
That's amazing. Thank you for sharing that personal information, because I think that
yeah.
it's, but I think, I mean, you said it's personal. I get that, but it's also, I think it's important that other people hear that life's not just been super easy for you. And like, you don't just like, you're not like a crazy savant that can just pick up anything and be perfect at
Yeah.
it, that we all can get to where you are if we work hard and we're,
And
tapping
use
into our
those
passion.
Yeah,
Yeah.
use those defeats or those little failures as stepping ground, or use them to help pivot you. And then in the end, when we look back, I don't really think it was a failure. It had to
Mhm.
happen for me to be in tech, right? For
Yeah.
me to write technical difficulties, I had to have moved here and kind of like switched up my family life and all that good stuff. So
Yeah. Well, we're happy that you're here, and we're happy that you wrote the book. So, I mean, I personally think everything turned out great. But that's awesome. Well, I'm so excited that you shared your story and talked about your book today. Is there any like last minute like leading thoughts or anything that we want to think about besides the links and how to buy your book? Like any other thought that you want to leave our audience with?
yeah, so honestly, I didn't think about this question. You try to have like the crushed questions programmed in your head. I didn't think of any final thoughts that I have for those listening and those watching, but I
Mhm.
would say kind of just tap into what is a perceived failure and use that to help really put your story out there and be vulnerable and get to where you need to be, that you feel you need to be. So again, be uncomfortable, because that's the only true way you'll be able to do what you were placed here to do. And check out my book. I think that it is a love letter to those who experience dyslexia and or other differences. And I think this book is going to really change some lives and challenge some minds, because you don't even have to have dyslexia in order to read this or to get value from this. I think now in 2020 and this decade, I think we are all going to be stepping into other people's shoes. We're all going to be very exploratory and understanding the lives of other people. And this is a great start to understand the lives of those who have dyslexia, and how you can be a contributor, how you contribute to their greatness, and vice versa.
And you said you didn't have any good closing words. That's like perfect.
That was off the cusp.
Yeah. Hey, and that's when you know it's real and it's authentic, not rehearsed. So again, I appreciate your time so much. We'll post those links to anyone who wants to purchase the book. And I
Okay.
really appreciate your time so much.
Thank you. And I'll see you in Greece, right?
Yeah, really. Let's coordinate that right after this. Thank you, Jeannette. It was a pleasure having you.
Thank you. I feel very good about this.
Yeah, me too. All right, well, see you online. Bye.
Okay.